book series. So.
Hi, hello, everybody. Hi, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. We at Left Wing Books are delighted to welcome Dr. Daniel Black, award-winning author, professor, and viral commencement speaker. This is the launch event for his highly anticipated new book, Isaac's Song. Dr. Black is in conversation tonight with St. Louis's own G'Ra Asim. So let's give a warm round of applause for both of our guests. I want to thank you all so much for joining us today. This is the first event of 2025 for our series, so we are super excited for everything we've got coming your way this year. Our website, left-bank.com, has a complete list of all the authors that are coming. Of note, next week on the 23rd, we're really excited for Stefan Triplett, whose new book, Bad Forecast, is a hybrid memoir, poetry, prose combination about growing up in Missouri and about adolescence and young adulthood and how disaster can kind of shape those things. So it's a beautiful book, and if you are all able, we hope to see you there. Full calendar can be found at left-bank.com. So for tonight's event, we are delighted to welcome Dr. Daniel Black today, and as I said, G'Ra Asim is going to be the conversation partner. He's a friend of the store and is going to be doing a great job introducing us to this book and this author tonight. G'Ra is a writer, musician, and assistant professor of English at WashU here in St. Louis. He is a writer. We've got his book available at the desk as well. Has been published in a ton of different places. He's done a ton of different musical accomplishment as well. He's a singer, he's a bass player, he's done it all. So we're really excited to have him with us today. And Daniel Black, as I said, is an author as well. That's why we're all here. So he's a professor of African American Studies at Clark Atlanta University. He's written several books, and his newest one is a beautiful, beautiful story called Isaac's Song. It's the follow-up to one from a few years ago called Don't Cry for Me. They complement each other really beautifully, but in my opinion, I don't think you have to read the first to read this one, though I really highly recommend you do. The story that we are returning to this time, the tale of our main character, is a young queer Black man finding his voice in 1980s Chicago. So it's a novel of family, forgiveness, and perseverance. It's really an incredible tale, and we're excited to have both of these authors in conversation with each other and talk about the writing process and the book and whatever else pops into their minds tonight. So go ahead and give another warm round of applause to welcome both of our guests today, and we will get started. So please join me in welcoming G'Ra Asim and Daniel Black.
What's up, everybody? I'm from Atlanta, so I had to make some adjustments to my clothes. But I'm glad to be here.
Well, first and foremost, congrats on this beautiful, moving book.
Yes, sir.
It is a great honor to be here and to watch it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
It's a real achievement. I figure we get right into it. One of the themes in the Isaac Song is the belief in the invisible, particularly how accessing the realm of the unseen is one of the ways that Black Americans survived the Middle Passage, persisted through enslavement and Jim Crow. Now, while our main character, Isaac, contemplates belief in the invisible as a survival tool, he's also visited by characters from his own imagination. So these invented characters speak to him as clearly and as evocatively as the ancestors. So that made me curious, Dr. Black, what do you see as the relationship between creativity and the invisible, if they're related at all?
I think they are related. I think two things. One of those is, of course, what we come to find out is that Isaac really is an empath, even though Isaac doesn't know the terminology, right? He's a spiritual empath. And that rushes up on him several times, even in Don't Cry for Me. Did some of y'all read Don't Cry for Me? Yes. When Isaac is at the grave and he feels his ancestors, etc. one of the things that I think I've discovered by writing both of these books is very often parents birth what they lacked, right? They give birth to the thing they need. And the error we make as children is to believe that our parents' job or that our parents' responsibility or even our hope, right, is that our parents are going to heal us. Really, we're going to heal them if it's going to happen, right? Because our parents gave us literally everything they had before we ever even started. And so, you know, when we start wondering, why didn't daddy hug me and kiss me? You know, why wasn't mama sweeter? You know, the truth of the matter is she was far sweeter than grandma. You know, and so the achievement happened before our coming. And so I'm saying this to say that the relationship between this visible and invisible is very important, because one of the things that Isaac has to wrestle with, and one of the things he comes to discover, is that his father had, metaphorically speaking, $10, and he gave Isaac $9.50. That's right. Right. Which is not a lot of money, but it's almost everything he had. Right. And so, you know, Isaac is a successful person. You know, he's going to college, he's graduated, and all of this. And Isaac really, at one point, believes that his success happened in the midst of his parents' shortcomings, versus his success happened actually because of who his parents are. Right. And sometimes that's hard to see, because it's really difficult to measure how much prayer covered you. That's hard to know. Right. But it's something I firmly believe. So by the time Isaac gets to the end of this book, you know, no spoilers here, but by the time he gets to the end, he realizes that at some point, every person has to contend with and come to terms with who your ancestors are, and the way they charge, and the way they inform, not just who you are, but the way they're covering you, even after they leave here. Because really, his father is still covering him, right? Yeah, in ways that Isaac doesn't even know. But his father's trying to get his attention spiritually throughout this book, right? And so the worst thing I think in the world is for people, especially Black people, to ever get to a point where the only thing we trust is what we see. That's beautiful.
So one thing I thought about, in sort of thinking about the architecture of this book, the way it's set up, is that until fairly recently, talk therapy was heavily stigmatized in American life.
Right.
And maybe even more so among Black Americans.
Right.
I think this kind of speaks to one of the things you're pointing at, that often the next generation is picking up the baton from a place they don't even recognize.
Right.
And so it's hard for them to even properly assess the problem. But in this novel, revisiting childhood memories with the help of a passionate interlocutor is really key to Isaac's healing in his book. Having another person who's not a family member, not a clergy member, helping him go back over his past is really central. How did you decide to make talk therapy kind of container for this book? And is that choice related to what you're saying about some of these stigmas kind of relaxing over time, even if we don't always recognize it?
Yes, and actually, Black people have always believed in therapy. We just didn't believe in going to somebody else's office for it. Right? It's like, and one of the things I'm very concerned about is preserving the sacred ways of knowing, the sacred being of how Black people have done excellence and done survival, that didn't always both get recognized and two get named, right? I remember so many times when, as a child, my father would send a deacon or would send me to my grandmother to get a good talking to. You know, that's what they call it, right? But it was therapy, you know, and there are so many things that Black people have always done, which we really understood, right? Like, Black people didn't believe in going to doctors always, but we always believed in healers, right? And most communities had them, right? And there are ways if we don't preserve this, if we're not very careful, we will allow ourselves to be written down in history, right, as an ignorant, uninformed people.
Anything like that.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that what Isaac does in this book is Isaac realizes that his formal education needs some help, right? And part of the help that the formal education needs, right, is the things that grandma and granddaddy had, right? We don't necessarily think of those things as necessities. But I was telling the class, I teach at Clark Atlanta University. This is my 31st year on faculty at Clark Atlanta University. And I tell kids all the time that there are so many things that if Black people shifted it, we would know it instantaneously. We don't necessarily praise it, but if it moved, we know it. Like, if at Thanksgiving we had stuffing instead of dressing, you know it. You know it. You know it immediately. And there would be violent reaction. Right. People would be very, very clear. Right. If the greens ain't right, we're messed up as a people. Those greens got to be right. There's a way to do this, right? Black choirs back in the day used to march in to a church service and sing. But the marching in had to be right. Most people don't know. The choir spent hours practicing not the song, the march. Right. You have to be able to turn that corner and never lose that beat, right? And I'm saying this, but it's not just because Black folk, quote unquote, didn't know any better. Not at all. It's actually because Black people have a sacred way we do ritual. Right. And the ritual, if it's not right, the spirit doesn't come. Because the ritual is really our way of saying, Spirit, we invite you here, right? And we have prepared the ground, if you will, right, for this to occur. Historically, I don't care how starving you are, you must bless this food before we eat. I mean, that's a given. That's what we do. Even if you don't believe in God, if you sit with Black people, you just sit and wait. Because this is part of how we do the ritual. Right. And I'm saying this because if we're not careful, we'll pass this off, right, as unimportant as silly folklore. Instead of really understanding the ways in which Black people in America are really consciously and subconsciously fighting to maintain traditions that kept us human.
That's right.
Right. We're the only people I know who could come out of slavery and teach our children to say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, to the same people who had us in bondage. See, Black people believed in character even while we were being molested. And that's really the thing that has really kept and sustained us. And Isaac discovers this, right? Isaac comes to know this. Isaac goes to a place called Lincoln University. Some of y'all have probably heard of Lincoln University, right?
Grandparents met there.
Are you yours?
Yeah.
Really? Wow. I'm telling you, this is crazy. His father, Blurred, is on the back of this book. And I didn't even know it was him. Spirit, once again. See, that alignment is going to happen. It's absolutely going to happen. And so I think that what's critical for us is to really put on a page, which is what I'm fighting hard to do here, these rituals, these traditions, these beliefs, right? In order that in the future, Black children will understand that magic was always happening in Blackness, right? Even in the midst of white supremacy.
That's a great summation of one of the big takeaways from the book. That's something that I was really struck by, both in terms of Isaac's particular story and the intertextuality that's happening in the story. And when I say that, for those of us who haven't read it yet, one thing this novel does really well is folding in other texts. They are folklore, as he mentioned, texts that Isaac himself devises in the course of his own creative journey.
Yes.
And the therapist character actually kind of steps in and is able to editorialize some of the stories.
Yes.
Which I thought was a great touch.
Yes.
And one thing she says, kind of casually, it's kind of tossed off, but it stuck with me. She said, what we actually need is more stories in which Black folks win.
Yes.
Isaac doesn't say that, the therapist does.
Therapist, yes.
We don't totally know how he felt about that feedback.
That's right.
Do you feel any pressure to deliver stories like that yourself as a creative person, and or do you feel like a hunger for that as a reader?
I feel no pressure whatsoever to write stories in which Black people win. Black people are going to always win in my books. That's what we do. That's what we do. You know what I'm saying? Like how self-hating, how self-debilitating is it for people to write their own story and write themselves as losers? You know, that famous African proverb that, you know, as long as the hunter tells the story, right, the lions are going to always lose. But if the lions tell the story, right, surely it's going to be a different narrative, right? Even if a gazelle tells a story about being hunted down by the lion might eventually get the gazelle. But surely there are going to be 3 or 4 chapters about how the gazelle leapt to the right and to the left and confused the lion, right? Surely there are going to be chapters about how the lion got tired and his tongue was hanging out as the gazelle was leaping. You know, in other words, it seems to me that the question of winning is really a question of self-love, right? Because I don't care what chapter. For me, I can write about the middle passage, which in fact I have done, right? In a book called The Coming. Some of y'all read The Coming. Yeah. And we won there too. Because see, winning is not always an issue of numbers. It's not always an issue of life, right? Winning very often for me is an issue of perspective, right? And that is whose children will be proud of this story. That's what winning means for me. If my children read this, will they hold their heads a little higher, right? Because, you know, these my people, you know what I mean? And yes, you can throw us into the water. But what you don't know is we know Yemen, yeah. So you see, Lord have mercy, help me. Part of what I think is so important is for Black people to exit out of this race for who's going to win the game of materialism in America. Right? I want out of that race. I want out of that race. I want out of that race because the people who keep winning are never the people I'm proud of. They're never the people I would like to follow. They're never the people who I believe have power. If I get in trouble, right, there are certain people whose prayer I believe in, right? There are people who I believe if they pray for me, right, I'm covered. And most of those people are not the politicians. Yeah, which is why I fight so hard for the sustaining of the Black church, right? I think the Black church needs an overhaul immediately. Right? I think it needs it badly, but I think we would lose more than we've ever known if we got rid of it. I think we should keep it. I just think that we should tear down the theology.
Yeah.
There is some commentary on exactly that concept. You know, there's a moment where Isaac says it pretty plainly. If it was just the music, I could stay.
Yes.
It's the doctrine.
Yes. Yes.
And because the book is called Isaac's Song,
Right.
That line, I mean, I felt that line down in my bones, really.
Yes.
What do you think is captured in the songs that the doctrine hasn't caused?
I know this question well because I'm a church musician. I grew up in a little bitty place called Blackwell, Arkansas. Right. Blackwell, Happy Bend. It's a little area. If you wouldn't know where you're going to miss it. Right. It's that place. There are a couple of folks in here who got some roots down there. We're my people. Yeah. What's up, Kenny? What's up, man? And I was a church musician. Right. I started playing the piano when I was 3 years old or so, and I started playing for the church when I was 5. My father set me on telephone books, right, so that my feet could reach, up under the piano. And what I realized very, very, very early is that the songs were saying something the pulpit was not saying. I realized that very, very early because there are ways the songs would move me that the sermons wouldn't. Right. And then, of course, I couldn't articulate it then because I hadn't studied. But what I've come to study is there are ways in which white supremacy has usurped the theology. but it could not usurp the music.
That's right.
Because the music, right, we were always keepers of melody as Black people, right? Even now, there's a difference between gospel music, right, and spiritual music, right? There's a difference. If you're going to do gospel, you got to get with Black people, right? And there's a reason, because there's a certain way we do it. And also, gospel is one of the last forms that is still primarily an oral form. See, 90% of Black church musicians who play for a gospel choir play by ear. Because even when you put it on sheet music, it's not really what we want. The sheet music is really for white people who are trying to have a little Black music in their congregation.
Right.
Because for Black people, the reason you got to play it by ear is because it must absolutely, it must be improvisation, right? And we're not going to sing it the way we rehearsed it. See, all of this is in there, right? But why? Because in the improvisation, in the call and response, right? In the repetition, this is how we conjure spirit. We might repeat the chorus twice. We might repeat it 7 times, right? We might clap and sing and dance and move. That's what we're going to do, right? But the reason this is critical is because what Isaac realizes is that there is an inherent power, right, in this oral form of Black people, right, that is hard to mimic anywhere else. In fact, you don't get a James Cleveland, you don't get a Sam Cooke, you don't get a Luther Vandross, you don't get a Whitney Houston, you don't get a Aretha Franklin, you don't get any of those people without this Black church, this Black music training, right? There's something magical that happens when Black people come together and start doing music. If we start doing music, spirit is going to happen. Now I'm gonna take a risk and say this too. We actually can conjure music in the club too. We can conjure spirit in the club. It's not the building.
No.
Right. It's not right. It's really the magic of the cohesion of the people and the unification of the people's souls and the people's spirits. And it's just completely and absolutely irreplaceable. It's something that cannot be bought and sold, and it's something that cannot be replaced. It's also something you can't remake. You know, you can't sing this song exactly like we sung it last week. That's gone. Each week is going to be something else. It's going to be something new. It's going to be something different. Because that's the magic, right, of Black creation. And this is really what Isaac learns by going to this place called Lincoln University. And, he's thinking that he's trying to get away from this hard daddy. He's thinking he's trying to get away from this ignorance that he kind of assumes on his people, only to realize in so many ways that the magic of what moves his spirit is actually inside those people. Right. And so this degree he has, you know, at one point he takes a light, I think it is, and sets his degree on fire. Because it's like, wait a minute, that didn't save me. Like, why in the world do I have a degree and people still think of me as a nigga in America? Then something right here, right? But of course, part of the problem is the belief that the sanction of white people was supposed to, in some kind of way, elevate him above his own people. And so that assumption really gets undermined in this book here.
The utility and sometimes the failure of education to not only do it, as you just said, but to create kind of security in the world.
Right.
That got sold to Isaac, that gets sold to a lot of other people.
Right.
Is one of the kind of driving engines of the plot in the story. One of the moments that really stuck with me is when Isaac goes back to school for a graduate degree.
Oh, yes.
And he's arguing with, I think, both the professor and some of his peers. I think it's a majority white classroom about Othello.
Right.
And one of the students says, "Oh, I really don't want you to bring your biases into your reading of this text," right? Because Isaac argues that race is central to how we should read Othello.
Right.
And his classmates are like, "No, we can actually have a raceless reading of this text."
Right.
And the moment that really kind of stunned me is that Isaac eventually says, reading this text through the lens of race is not my bias. If it were up to me, this wouldn't be a problem at all. This is not something I'm hung up on. This is something that's hung up on me.
Right.
And while that might seem like kind of an elementary observation to make, you don't hear it that often.
No.
Was any of that informed by your own experience in the classroom as an instructor or as a student?
In some ways, yes. You know, I did a PhD in African American Studies many moons ago now. And one of the things I remember very excitedly was for the first time, in fact, when I did the degree in the late 80s, it was the first time any school in America was conferring a terminal degree in Black studies, right? And I was in the first class there with Malefi Asante and Sonia Sanchez and, you know, and all of these and the likes of these folks. And what was so unbelievably remarkable is absolutely everything we read was about Black people. And in most instances, by Black people, right? Black theology, Black sociology, Black music, right? Aesthetic traditions in African art, social movements in the Black, like everything was about Black people. And it was the most incredible educational experience I've ever had. What I remember is people asking me what I was going to do with this. Right. And they said, you know, can you get a job? You know, I said, I have to be honest with you. Black people have been doing jobs since we got off the boat. I don't fear not getting a job. People always dream of something for Black people to do. Number one. Number two, do you know how insulting it is to ask somebody, if you study yourself, can you find it legitimate? Which is what white folks have been doing for centuries. When someone gets a degree in American studies, right? When someone gets a degree in Renaissance, all they're studying is white people. Nobody asks them, oh, do you think somebody's going to hire you? You know, because ultimately the assumption is that who we are, what we are, how we be, our existence is always marginal to something else, right? And that something else really is the center of whiteness. And so, you know, my response I remember very well is I told folks, not only will I get a job, I'll either get one or I'll make one, right? And of course, I went to a Black school after I finished that degree, and I do it again. I do it again and again and again and again. I have not made very much money teaching at a historically Black school, right? That's probably no secret to anybody, right? I've not made much money at all teaching at a Black school, but I've made a hell of a lot of influence in terms of how we see ourselves, how we love ourselves, the way children think about themselves, right? The way in which a Black boy can actually look at a Black girl who's beautiful, right? And I've taught how you honor a Black woman and not simply desire her, right? But these are things we do at Black colleges, you know what I mean? But the classroom is about half of it. The other half, right, is us continuing the work our ancestors started in the cotton field. See, I'm one who believes, and I really do, I'm one who believes that as they were picking cotton, somebody whispered to somebody else, I hope our kids one day, you know, sit up in the same class and those kids are us. I believe they dreamed us. It's really poor people who don't dream their own children's future. You know, I believe our ancestors dreamed it, right? But I'm saying that because my tenure at Clark Atlanta University was really a dream job. It's been a dream job. And I did the commencement speech last May. Y'all saw that?
Here they come, y'all. Here they come. Yeah.
I did the commencement speech last May. The first time a faculty member had ever been asked to do the commencement speech ever in the history of the school, ever. I was nervous as all get out, right? But I said, ancestors, you know what's riding on this. Give it to me, right? And, you know, I said what I said. What was so remarkable, G'Ra, is as I was giving that speech, Black kids stood and were closing their eyes, just stomping the earth, screaming. Just screaming. I'll never, ever forget it. Just screaming at the top of their lungs. Come on, Dr. Black. Come on, Dr. Black. Right. And in that moment, I realized that if we're not careful, we as Black people, sometimes we will allow ourselves to be bought away from our children's influence. Right. And there are good reasons. You know, I get it. I really do get it in more ways than you can know. I don't blame anybody where they I get it. But when I saw the way those children were literally almost itching with ecstasy, right, I realized that I had been in the right place. Right. And I do it again. I do it again and again and again and again.
Can you say a little more about what you mean by our children's influence?
Yeah, you know, at historically Black colleges, you know, Black kids come to historically Black colleges for all sorts of reasons. But one of them, I think, and one of them I've discovered is I think many come to historically Black colleges also for the possibility of seeing what learning looks like when they don't have to prove themselves. And it's sometimes very difficult. In fact, very often Black children are very shocked at Black colleges because Black colleges prove far harder. Because the history of Black colleges is really the history of Black people. And that is the standard at Black colleges sometimes is even higher than it is at other places. I went to Oxford after I finished Clark, Oxford, England, right? It was the easiest academic experience I've ever had. It was the easiest. Now, there were people there who were brilliant. Nope, it was wonderful. It was the easiest. Clark, Atlanta was the hardest academic institution I've ever attended. My undergrad degree was harder than my PhD. Because I had teachers who, when they said the paper's due at 5, they didn't mean 5:05. They mean 5:02. They would take your paper and drop it in the trash if you came at 5:02, right? They meant when they said, I want your name in the upper left-hand corner, they would take a ruler and see if those margins were correct, right? Does somebody understand what, right? Yeah. But why? Because what they knew, what Black people knew, what Black professors knew is when you leave here, somebody has already believed that they're going to destroy you. You have to be so excellent that even in their attempt, even in their desire to destroy you, they cannot. And they taught that. They really, really taught that. So I was an English major at Clark. We read Shakespeare. We read Hawthorne. We read Edgar Allan Poe. We read all that at Clark. But we also read Richard Wright. And we also read Dunbar, and we also read Toni Morrison, and we also read Langston Hughes, and we also read Frederick Douglass, and we also read Harriet Jacobs. And I believed in my heart that there was no white school where any English major was reading all of the texts I was reading. I believed that. I absolutely believed that. We were reading Caribbean literature. We were reading African literature. And it was challenging. It was really, 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 really challenging. But when I left there and went to other schools, I saw that I'd been so excellently prepared. That's when I decided I got to go back there. I have to go back there because there's another generation of kids coming. Right? And their preparation, right, has got to equal this. Because if it does, our future is guaranteed. And so that's why I've done it. I'm trying to retire now and they won't let me.
It's good to be loved, though, right?
It is good to be loved. It is good.
Now, you mentioned in passing, was it Bakewell? Is that what in our
Blackwell? Blackwell. Population about 50 people now.
Well, there's like a turning point in the novel in Jacob, that's Isaac's father, Jacob's relationship with Isaac.
Right.
When he takes Isaac down home, but he goes down home, back to Arkansas.
Yes.
And it's the first time that Isaac realizes that a person can be out of context.
Yes.
Which I found really profound.
Yes.
It's the moment where he realizes the version of his father he's always known is a placeless version of his father.
That's right.
And the version of him that comes to the fore when he's in his home is actually a more likable version of himself.
Right. That's right.
And that, I think that's the beginning of Isaac kind of waking up to his own relationship to the land, his relationship to his
That's
history.
right.
And the sense that maybe the view of his father that he had is kind of limited by his own perspective.
Yes.
As a young man.
Yes.
I wondered how the question of place
Yes.
influences your own artistry, not just in this book, but in your work more broadly.
Yes. Well, you know, again, I grew up in this little place called Blackwell, Arkansas. And one of the things as a kid, well, I was actually born in Kansas City. I was born in Kansas City, and my father, his name is Harold Black, who's from Blackwell, Arkansas. My father moved us back to Arkansas when I was 5, right? So I have memories of Kansas City, but the majority of my childhood I was in Arkansas. And the thing I remember more than anything about Arkansas is how we lived on the land. My great-grandfather had migrated from South Carolina after slavery, coming west, and bought 500 acres of land in the center of Arkansas in a place called Blackwell. We still live on 300 of those 500. Okay? And what I remember as a kid is there was always a garden. Peas, oh God. I shell peas, right? Back in the day, you shell peas and your thumbs would be purple, right? From shelling peas, corn, tomatoes, okra, chickens. We raised everything we ate, quite literally. Only thing we didn't raise was sugar, right? Flour. But the land was so central to our existence. Meaning we could be broke, but we wouldn't be hungry, right? And there was a relationship to the land. I didn't realize, of course, until I left. There was a relationship to the land, right? That I had. And you'll find this funny, you know, I was a musician when I was 6, 7 years old. So about 10 or 11, I was choir director. And we had this echo because there was trees all behind our house. I'd go back into the woods at times and sing the choir parts because the trees would echo it back to me, right? And I could sing it, and literally it would just echo all through the forest. But while the echo was happening, I could sing the other part because I wanted to hear the harmonic structure, right? I was a kid, you know, I couldn't have explained it really then, right? But what I realized is I come from a people who had this relationship. Every other year or so, we had a thing called homecoming, right? We had family reunions in Blackwell where people from everywhere would descend on this little community, right? People from St. Louis and Kansas City and Chicago and New York, all these northern places, right, would come, right, down to Arkansas where their mother, their father, somebody had been reared at one point, right? And when these reunions happen, it would be hundreds of people. And I would be so excited, first of all, because we'd get other kids to play with, right? And it was always a fun time. There was always going to be great church when all these folks came, because there's going to be somebody who had moved away to Chicago, but was a musician who could really play, right? And so I remember so very, very, very well the ways in which all these people came back and told these stories about growing up on this land. Right. So something always seemed magical to me about the place. It always seemed to have taken care of a people's heart, of a people's souls, right? And at some point I want to write about it. You know, I grew up watching a TV show called The Waltons. Right? Y'all somebody remember that, right? And so, you know, John Boy was a writer, right? And I was very academic in school also. And I said, you know, one day I'm gonna do for Blackwell what John Boy did for, you know, Walton's Mountain. And the irony is that I've now done it, you know? And so that notion of place, not only is it important, but place is central in terms of how people understand themselves, their strength, their identity. And finally, it's so critical to force Black children back to the land. Black children need the land, right? I even think you should make Black kids take your shoes off, right? And let the dirt seep all over your feet. Like walk on this in your bare feet, because there's ancestral reverberation in this land, right? Our people paid for this, right? And one of the worst things Black people did, though I understand why, is we gave land away. We moved away from it. We walked away from it. There's one point where we own half the land in the South. But because of Jim Crow laws, because of white folks' craziness, we wanted to get away from it, and we did, right? But in many instances, we also lost the land. And without the land, it's difficult to construct a child's identity and to construct a child's self-worth, right? But on a piece of land, right, where a child can run outside and play and not have to look for a fence, right? That matters in terms of a child's consciousness, in terms of the largesse of who they understand themselves to be.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. It's funny, I've heard my own forebears talk about their relationships to the places they came from before migrating north. Feel like I only now fully understand what that longing to get back there.
And see, there was a time between really between slavery and probably ended maybe around the 80s, when the majority of Black kids in northern cities were sent south for the summer. Right? You're right. In fact, parents would start packing kids up last week of school. Let's get your shit together. You know, and kids would be crying, I don't want you going. You're going. You're going. Grandma, great uncle, cousin, they're down there waiting for you. And I remember this because over the summer, the youth choir would multiply in church. Because you are going to church. You come to the church, right? And it would be people just everywhere, right? And we love the summers because kids were everywhere. And again, we had playmates, right? I remember this just so nostalgically. And what I also remember is there are people now who've grown up, of course, who now even live in urban places, but even after their own parents have passed and they never actually lived there themselves, still come. Right. You know, I'll go home sometimes for Christmas or sometimes Thanksgiving, whatever, and there will be people who come and we'll see, you know, a license plate from Minneapolis, Minnesota. We're like, wow, I wonder who that is. It must be some of Miss Corrine's people, right? And somebody get out of the car and say, I don't know if y'all remember me, but I used to play, right? And it's just such a fond memory, right? Because really, all of these souls are connected because somewhere at the root, these Black people were in bondage together. And they hoped for us, right, together. And the sending the kids back south was really Black people's earnest attempt to make sure that children always knew, right, that the tree was bigger than just a few leaves.
There are a whole lot of fascinating and lovable characters in this novel, but I gotta let you know, two that really that I was quite fond of are Jessica Carr and Adam Stewart. And I single them out because they're these kind of taciturn, enigmatic, Black geniuses. Right? Both of them. Isaac encounters one, Jessica Carr, in like a grade school classroom. And then Adam Stewart is kind of like this college buddy. They link up with. But there is a similarity between the two in that both of these people have these really sophisticated inner experiences that they mostly don't verbalize.
That's right.
And I happen to know a few versions of that in real life, but I gotta let you know, I don't encounter that in books very often, or Black characters with that level of nuance, or even encounter an author dealing with what it's like to have a level of interiority that you can't easily share with the world.
That's right.
And particularly in the context
of
a Black person. Where did those two characters come from? And what do you think they do for the story?
Well, let me tell you what's really funny about the question. I love your question. What's really funny about the question is I've gotten to the place where I don't know that I celebrate Black genius. Because Blackness is genius.
Okay.
Right. In other words, when we celebrate a child as being exceptional, right, we're really telling that child that this child is something the rest of us are not. Right. And I don't know that I ever see that. Once we get our perspective together. Right. Yes, I have a PhD, but Harriet Tubman ran back and forth 17 times. Which one is the genius? You see, so like, you know, the notion that I'm brilliant because I have a PhD, no, absolutely no way. Just couldn't possibly be true. You know, or I played the piano very early. But when I got ready to go to college in this little community called Blackwell, people, and this is really a true story, they took up an offering, right, to send me. That's the genius. That's the genius. Because what they were really doing was they were all pouring in to something they hoped for.
Right.
Right? My job is simply to explain it, not to supersede it. In other words, the genius of Black people, if we didn't already manifest it, we wouldn't even be alive. The Middle Passage was the genius. How in the world are people captured, dragged halfway around the world with absolutely nothing, and their children go to colleges? That's genius. Right? But if the children are not careful, they'll think going to college is the genius. No. The fact that you're going is the genius. Right? Because somebody else prepared that way. And so what I'm saying is, I think a lot of times what we're calling Black genius is simply Black excellence compared to whiteness. Right? It's like when people boast about Du Bois having gone to Harvard. Right? I don't think that's an achievement.
Well, he did say, the pleasure, I assure you, was all there.
Yes, and let me interpret. He absolutely said that. And in fact, you know what he was saying? He was saying, this ain't nothing. You should have seen me at Fisk. I mean, come on. He comes out of this little Black college and you go to Harvard. You don't just go to Harvard. You become the #1 graduate of the institution. Then Fisk must have been hell. But see, most people don't say that. Most people don't recognize that. Because it's really in the midst, it's really in comparison to whiteness where Black excellence gets its applause. Right? But very often the standard of whiteness is too low. And so we're calling things excellent that are really ordinary when we get. Absolutely.
I think those characters are particularly memorable to me because we do expect brilliance to look a particular way.
That's right.
And
That's right.
you kind of take pains to explain that these two characters showed up in a different way than people are.
Absolutely. And Adam is so absolutely brilliant. He's also very socially kind of awkward.
Right.
Right. But I do think it was very, very important. And I love that you love Adam, right? In fact, we homeboys for that. I love that you love Adam and I love him too. And in many ways, that's why he's Adam. I named him for this reason. Because you see? So then is the genius him or is it the author? You know what I mean? No, but seriously, the thing about him that I think that's wonderful is that I think what he carries is the essence of who we are as Black people. Right? Again, what I've done for so many years is I had to go back. It's a Sankofa moment. I had to go back, right? And not find, I had to go back and label and discover and name the genius in Black people. Because if I was not careful, I was saying there was something Baldwin had that grandmama never had. Right. No, there was a manifestation that Baldwin had that was different from grandmama's genius. Listen, if you can raise 10 kids in a 2-bedroom house and none of them go to jail, it is a genius somewhere. Right? But again, where is that in a book? You know? And so I just think there are critical ways where we have to resurrect. We have to do a kind of resurrection of who we are and our truths. And we have to help young people to understand that the ground, Black soil is fertile for your excellence, right? Because really it's what we do. And the truth of the matter is there is no America without it. And I don't just mean Black, there is no America without it, right? There is no musical tradition in America without Black people, right? It would not exist, right? We all know there are famous people who sing, who if they were Black, you'd be in the church choir on the second row. We know, right? We know, right? It's the same way we whisper about people's food when we go to their houses. We don't do that. I think brother said we got time for one more.
This one around about midway through the book, there's a confrontation at Lincoln. There's a character named Will, and essentially someone who was initially very expressive, I have to call him flamboyant.
Right.
Then he plunges to a particular frat and he kind of becomes subdued. That's right. And his very haunting one-liner is, "I'll take a little bondage with my regularity." And I just wanted to talk to you about that line. And one thing I appreciate about it is Isaac is initially kind of judgmental.
That's right.
Somebody saying that.
That's right.
Of course, like we all do, we live long enough to essentially do the thing you would judge somebody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The thing I think that makes that line important, that even that scene important, is the question of queerdom and the question of queerness in the Black community. I'm not sure we've handled this question well, because I think we've been trying to wrestle with this too much as a theology. Right, the notion of, is it right? Can you be saved and be gay? All of this, right? And I think all of that is the wrong question, right? I think all that's the wrong question. But much more importantly, I think what we have to do is to get clear that there are times and there are people who have been sent to our community as queer people, as gay or lesbian people, and they really have been our salvation. Right? Even if you talk about a ball, right? One of the things that I've been a little frustrated with about people's lauding of James Baldwin is they laud his brilliance, right, without lauding his being. Right. And I think that's highly problematic. See, you can't get James Baldwin's genius without James Baldwin's queerness. Because the queerness prepares the ground for that kind of exceptionality. But we don't say it that way because most people, we're not proud of him. And here's how you know. People will clap for Baldwin. I don't know that I've ever heard any person say they're hoping for a son like him. That's how you know we don't want him. Right. And that's a serious problem for me. That's a serious, that's a problem. Right. And there are ways in which it makes us throw away, if you will, some of our genius, some of our excellence. Right? There's no March on Washington without Bayard Rustin. Right? And there are ways then, certainly, and in some instances, even now, that we want his organizing skills. See, in other words, we got to stop bifurcating our queer people. Right? We've got to understand that God sends people in bodies, in frames, because that frame is necessary to hold that picture. Right? And we have to really begin to understand that. And we got to give back somebody else's judgment. Again, a lot of this is really Black church issue. Right? You're really not going to have the Black musical tradition without Black queerness. You're just not going to have it. Right? In other words, Black queerness is so exceptional, right, and so creatively dynamic that really we can't do without it, which is why in most instances, especially in churches, folks will just be quiet. Right? Because can somebody else sing better? Yeah. But that's the wrong thing too. What we've got to get to the place where we teach the Black queer child that you look like God too. Right. And not you look like God if you get delivered. Right. Not that. You look like God as is. Why? Because our daddies, our uncles, our mothers are right. They all get to go. They all got to quote unquote go to heaven, and they were all absolutely right themselves in whatever genius or struggle that might be. And so I'm saying the reason I had that character there is because Isaac absolutely has got to come to terms, who's a queer man himself, has got to come to terms with the possibility that the question of his sexuality and is he okay, stop asking God that question. God is not going to answer that question. That's not a God question. That's a question for you. Right? See, if you accept yourself, God can walk with you.
Okay.
Right? If you're acceptable, God is silent about it. Because acceptable is not a question for God. It's a question of what you find honorable and what you can find acceptable. Right? And can you manifest divinity in this? And every person's got to answer that.
Great note to end on. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Oh, look at my people.
All right, good.
Okay, now I need everybody to wave. Hey. Thanks. Sure.
Thank you all so much. Since we started a little late, I apologize about that. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions if anyone has anything pressing that they want to ask, and then we'll move to a signing line. So any questions? Hello, Dr. Black.
Hey.
April Warren G. Nubia.
Yes. Nubian.
So, as a teacher myself, I have students all the time Black students who are hesitant to accept all their Blackness because it may be limited.
Sure.
Or they don't. And I'm right. I just know a lot of people, a lot of Black folks who like, yeah, put that Black stuff aside. Yeah, like, how do we help them as I'm trying to help them to remember, meaning to put back together our Black ancestral practices and heritage traditions and all of that? How do we help them like embrace it? Because they just, it's not important. I mean, it's cool, but I'm not into it.
Sure. As a teacher, right, I think you ignore them. And you and I think you put the Blackness in front of them as a given. Right. Like one of the things that I've done for the last several years is I name my students, right? They'll come in and they'll tell me the name, right? And throughout the semester, right? Okay, come on, Brother Quasi. He'll say, oh no, my name is Anthony. Okay, no problem. No problem. Quasi, go ahead. And what's funny is, after a while, right, I'll say Anthony. He's like, I thought I was Quasi. Right? See, in other words, you have to get in front of their self-hatred. Right? You have to get in front of it, right? And you have to act as if, right, their self-hatred, right, is immaterial and unimportant and doesn't matter. And you got to live out the love and the beauty of them. That's number one. The second thing is to touch them. Our children are really untouched except in punishment. Right? We don't really touch each other enough. And I don't mean in intimacy. I mean simply because you are beautiful and you exist. It's like, you know, you see a bouquet of flowers, and very often people will touch it, right? But why are we touching it? We're not touching it for sexual reasons, right? Why are we touching it? Because we're connecting to beauty, right? That's the same kind of way when I say, hey, good morning, brother. How you doing? Well, he don't touch, it doesn't matter. He will touch you back in a minute because in a second, his spirit will absolutely get used to the vibration of my celebration of his being. So I do that with my students all the time. And sometimes they'll move their head. No problem. I'm coming back. I'm coming back. I'm coming back, right? And by the time the semester ends, now it's like, what you teaching next semester, Dr. Black? Damn. Right? So my class ends up looking like this, but it's really supposed to be 20 people in here. Right? Because the spirit starves for the thing that the mind denies. Right? So always follow the spirit. Sometimes people will tell you, I don't even like this class. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. In other words, don't give them the option not to have it. Yeah.
I have a question for myself.
Yes, brother.
I did the tough upbringing of coming up in Blackwell, and the our family.
Yes.
how did that shape you and make you the man that you are?
Yes, sir.
And after having to go through all the tough things, because it wasn't easy.
No.
I have fond memories of coming down and seeing family members when I was 5.
Yes.
And I remember being at the shack with the outhouse.
Oh, absolutely.
And to come from there to where you are now, what drove you?
A couple of things. He's literally my cousin too. It's not play cousin. My father's discipline was something so exact that I thought I hated that man. Right? It was so hard. It really, and this was the 70s, right? It was so hard. But I realize now that it's that discipline that got me to a PhD. It's that discipline that allowed me to write even when I was questioning myself. Right? This is my 10th novel. That's that discipline. I didn't connect it at first, but it absolutely is. And what I realized, Kenny, when I left home and went to Clark, you'll laugh, but you'll get it. Of course, Arkansas, it seemed like Arkansas used to be 150 degrees in the summer, hot as hell. And I was just like counting days. I was like, I'm coming out of this mother. I mean, I'm so mad about it. I'm 16 and 17. I want to be, out in the streets, and daddy's talking about get this hay in the barn. I'm like, I don't even like cows. But what I remember is when I got to Clark and we went into the library, I'll never forget that we went into the library. The library was air conditioned. That seems so simple. I said, I get to sit in an air-conditioned room and read? Oh, I know I'm a graduate. I got this. I got this. Oh, we can do it. Oh, please, I'm fine now. And so what I realized, and my father told me something years later, Kenny, and I said, I didn't believe it, but he said it was true. He said, I was trying to make you hate the limitations of what we were here. So you believe it. And I did. I did. And I write now, and all of this. And it's the most remarkable life. It's just really the most incredible life. In every city I go to, I meet cousins and people, and they're like, oh my God, how did this happen for you? And the truth of the matter is, some of your own folks too, Cousin Helen and Miss, and Aunt Amy and all, they planted seeds.
Amen.
Right? And they planted seeds in me, and they had expectation of what you were going to do and what you were going to become. And finally, my folks if they hated anything, they hated laziness. I tell people, and this is really true, the first time in my life I slept past 6:30 a.m. was the day I went to college. No, you talking about 9 o'clock. My folks said, hell, the day gone. We're going to land up watching TV, or we're going to watch cartoons. What? Absolutely not. That's, but it's translated into a work ethic now that has borne fruit beyond anything I could ever describe. So yeah, I give thanks for those ancestors.
Amen.
Anyone else? Yes, sir, brother. No, come to you. Yes, sir.
Dr. Black.
Hey, man.
As a graduate of Parkland University.
See, hey, you.
First year seminar, they tell me about home reading those type of books that at the time, I was like, why were they forcing us to do this? But then reading it, it really touched a lot of souls that came through.
Yes, sir.
At what point can we have the books to now become things that we may see on Netflix that tell your story? Because every story that you tell, there's God in it.
Yes.
And in this generation where now I'm the uncle and my fiance we're the auntie.
Right.
How can we take your story so that way we can inspire the next generation, because they are lost?
Yes.
There's a lot of distractions, and I believe that your stories, that the stories that you have written, could help.
Yes, sir. Well, two things. One, I want to warn us not to say that children are lost, right? Because children are always guided Now, if we're going to say something, we're going to say we lost them. Right. If we're going to say something, let's say that, because then we can go get them. Right. The second thing is, the only thing I can tell you is the first movie is going to be Perfect Peace. Perfect Peace is gonna be the first. Yeah, I'm under contract right now to do all the exploratory things for the movie version of Perfect Peace. So that's first. That's first. And then they've asked me about some others, and it's mind-boggling. For like, oh my God, is this me? Is this happening to me? Right? But some others are coming. Yeah, so get ready, brother. It's on the way. Yeah. One last one. Yes, sir.
When you did the comment.
Yes, sir.
All right. So this is I met you by Karen Hunter.
Yes, sir.
So when you did the comment, I listened to it on audio.
Yeah.
So it kind of regulated where I was like almost there.
Yes.
I mean, emotionally
Yes.
there.
Yes.
And I was like, man, how did he write this? And then he speak it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And make me understand that.
Well, you know, the thing about The Coming, how many of y'all read The Coming? Oh, many of you. The thing about The Coming that I tried to do, that I pray I did maybe.
I'm not trying to get off the subject.
No. Absolutely. Is I sought to make the words on the page do what the water was doing. Right. And as a musician, one of the things The Coming is a book. Every sentence I read out loud. So because I was trying to get a rhythmic structure to each sentence, right? Because I was really trying to force the reader onto the boat, right? So that we could not read this story as something separate from us, right? But as something which you had to experience and go through yourself. So there are these short, kind of cacophonous sentences that do this rhythmic structure. We marched over hills and valleys. We marched through dry desert land. We marched through deserts. We marched, we marched, and then a sentence until the moon gave us ease, right? So that literally, I'm trying to give us a sense, right, of the kind of redundancy, right, of what it might have been like to be in the belly of that ship, right, just being tossed, as Black people say, to and fro, right, constantly over and over and over and over, and it seems to have worked. So I appreciate that for that applause, my brother. Thank you. And so let me say that I honor everybody for coming out. I wasn't sure who was gonna come because I know y'all had snow, right? And I said, oh God, am I even gonna get to St. Louis? And I said, I'm going to St. Louis, and if it's just me, I'm just gonna be there and I'm gonna read out loud, right? So I'm just so grateful. And I'll sign absolutely every book. So if you can be patient, we'll absolutely make it happen. So let me just say I love you all and thank y'all for having me.
Love you.